Indiana is one of the most highly connected ecosystems in the world.
Endeavor-led companies generated $345 million in revenue and created nearly 2,000 jobs in this region, which I just think is awesome.
Yeah, I haven't heard somebody say it like that.
And to me, the trend line of entrepreneurship and founders and opportunity in the Midwest is incredibly positive. Yep. I think we absolutely need big exits and loud failures.
All right, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Logan Jones here, joined by Evan Knowles. Today, we are sitting down with Jake Budler, who is a good friend of ours from Endeavor. So Jake is the Director of Entrepreneur Experience at Endeavor from the Endeavor Midwest office. And Endeavor exists to help entrepreneurs with fundraising, mentorship, and essentially just build thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems in emerging and underserved markets around the world. So we had Jake on a few years ago. We're excited to have him back on. Before we talk to Jake, let's just get a quick word from our sponsors. Before highlighting our sponsors, we'd just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you're a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. Middle Tech is sponsored by Bolt Marketing. Take your website to the next level with a website that's built to work. At Bolt Marketing, they're revolutionizing websites for small businesses that are affordable, customizable, and hassle-free. Whether you have a construction company, a boutique clothing store, or you own a hot yoga studio, they have options for you. Click the link in our show notes to explore their marketing options that can transform your marketing and grow your business. And as a personal note, Bolt Marketing built our website, and they were awesome to work with throughout the entire process. We highly recommend working with them. Middle Tech is also supported by Huntsicker, an impact venture studio based in Lexington, Kentucky. Huntsicker is creating companies out of the ordinary by founding and funding the next generation of purpose-driven startups. They partner with founders to create indispensable solutions to the world's most fundamental problems. On a quarterly basis, they host an invite-only intimate gathering called Fireside Convos, where attendees representing a wide network of stakeholders in the regional entrepreneurial ecosystem discuss timely topics, including the role of AI for startups out of Kentucky and the challenges of identifying and attracting talent. To be considered as a guest, visit huntsicker.co/fireside to apply. All right, Jake, we were just talking. It's been almost exactly 3 years since we had you on. It was episode 149 last time we got to talk to you. So we're excited to be catching up with you. How you doing?
I'm well. That 3 years feels like 6 years. Lots happened, but always good to see you guys, and appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, absolutely. You've definitely been busy during that time. We were chatting a little bit about everything you've had going on over the past 3 years. So I think the first thing I want to hear about is you're a founder yourself of a small business, Tomorrow Bookstore. So just tell us a little bit about starting a bookstore. What's that been like?
Started a bookstore. It was, so I'm up in Indianapolis from you all. And, I think as any entrepreneur, we had a gap. We don't have a bookstore. We didn't have, at the time, we didn't have a bookstore downtown Indy. And my wife and I, Julia, love going to bookstores. We love traveling and kind of exploring cities through their bookstores. And Indianapolis didn't have that. And we kind of always joked, one day we'll retire, we'll start a bookstore. And Julia at the time she's a professional video editor and was potentially looking to do something different and kind of make a career change. And so that joke quickly turned into a serious, hang on, let's start a bookstore. So we got off the ground. I think we had the maybe the best and maybe most overbuilt pitch deck for a bookstore ever. And ended up opening in April 2023. So it's been just a little bit over a year. Tomorrow Bookstore, we're on Mass Ave, which in Indianapolis, kind of the retail and restaurant corridor downtown. And it's been super fun to, one, get into a business that is, an incredible community building business that has a really tangible impact. But also, on the business side, to do something a little different, a small retail business is a different experience. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I follow you on Instagram. I feel like I saw you sharing all sorts of stuff about local media picking you guys up and supporting you all. So I'm sure that's been a lot of fun and, just nice getting that sort of support from the local business community.
Yeah, it's, I think at the time we theorized, like, hey, there's readers in the Midwest, in Indianapolis, right? Indiana has a super strong education system. We export a ton of talent from the schools here. And it's like, wait a minute, like, people read books. People want experiences as well, right? Kind of the shift back to local and experience and kind of independent stores. And then books, have benefited from TikTok and from Instagram and from you can be a book talk influencer now. And that's something that's new in the last couple of years that added for us. So absolutely. Yeah, it was, I think it was nice to be proven right that media came out and people were excited and, immediately people jumped on and joined the community. So yeah, Evan, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no worries. What goes into designing or differentiating a bookstore? So for instance, in Asheville, I went to a really cool bookstore that was like a bookstore / bar, and it was like a lounge, and it was really cool. But what about you all? How did you go about like curating? How do you just talk about the experience of starting a bookstore and differentiating and like curating the books?
Yep. I mean, so that you're kind of spot on. Curation is a huge part of it. So I get to run the business and operations side, which is really fun. So books are interesting because more or less bookstores sell new books at the same price. So you're not really competing on price. And bookstores are also more or less getting the same discount, the same kind of gross margin. So there's a little bit you could do on cost, but really what it comes down to is how well do you curate? There's actually a Harvard Business School professor, Dr. Ryan Raffaelli, who focuses on kind of retail economics, who did a working paper about the rise of independent bookstores. And really it came down to building a community, curating your content and bringing people together, doing events. And that's kind of, you think about books out there, you're sure there's bestseller lists, but there's a ton of books out there. There's so much content. And we've got a couple of neighboring bookstores, and I'll go in and there's a little bit of overlap in the selection that they've chosen, but there is so much that you can do on what you want to focus on, so much out there that curation is a huge part of it.
For sure. And one of the other things that I got to participate in that you put on was this Indy Tech Tour. So I just wanted to bring it up briefly and kind of talk a little bit about what it actually was and why you did it and all that sort of stuff. But actually, I forget how long the drive was. I think it was like 3.5 hours. We got to come up and get a tour of Indianapolis's tech ecosystem. So tell us a little bit about starting that and why you started it and some of the feedback you got from that event.
Yeah, Indy Tech Tour. I mean, so the concept was like, hey, let's do a tour of tech founders, but let's have it be founder-led and kind of grassroots, right? Indy's got awesome organizations that support entrepreneurs. I mean, Endeavor, we're one of them, right? We're supporting working entrepreneurs, and you come to Indy, you go to Louisville, right? There's organizations out there that you can meet and you can talk to, and they do events, and that's awesome. But I was like, hey, one of Endeavor's core tenets, one of our I'm going to immediately blank on the word.
Core values?
Whatever. Core values. There we go. It's like, come on. Is entrepreneur first, right? So like Endeavor, we're focused on being entrepreneur first. In the same vein, I was like, hey, how do we show off Indianapolis's tech ecosystem and entrepreneurs? Well, let's have people meet founders. So launched Indy Tech Tour. You came up. There was people from kind of around the Midwest that came to town. There were a number of folks from Indy, from corporates that wanted exposure, wanted to learn about the tech ecosystem because tech's awesome. It's great. If you're in it, we're really wrapped up in it, but it's just another industry in some ways, and people outside of tech don't often know what's going on within tech in our own city. And so we spent a whole day touring around Indy, and every place we went to, every stop we went to, founders were speaking. And founders were telling, folks about what are they building and why are they building it in Indy and why are they building it in the Midwest. And rather than having me or someone like me stand up on stage and tell you about founders, why don't you just come hear from the founders? And that was the kind of theory behind it. I think it went awesome. I was a big fan. I mean, you were there, so hopefully you agree. I'm sure we're going to pull it out of the bag and do it again at some point. And then, from my vantage point or kind of my role with Endeavor, I know enough founders and had enough folks that I could call up and say, hey, like, I know you're really busy. Give me an hour, come talk to some people. It's gonna be fun and exciting. So I don't want to ask them to do that too much, but I think it's probably time to maybe do a round 2 of the Indy Tech Tour.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome event, like I said, and I think it should be done in pretty much all these cities that kind of have their own startup ecosystem. I'd love to see a Lexington Tech Tour and a Louisville Tech Tour. I'm sure it's a little bit of a lift to actually put it on, but I just think actually getting face to face and kind of like seeing the offices of where these people are building their businesses is just cool. It kind of, materializes it for people, and especially people that might not be within the startup ecosystem already. But anyway, so, we wanted to have you on to kind of talk about what's been going on at Endeavor and, what you've been observing within Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana over the past 3 years as it relates to the startup ecosystem. So I guess just to start us off, let's start by talking about a refresher on what Endeavor actually does, in case anybody that's joined us here was not a listener back in 2021. Just kind of talk about the mission of Endeavor and how you guys are doing what you're doing.
Yep. So, quick backstory to Endeavor. So we're a global organization, started in 1997. First offices were in Chile and Argentina. And the thesis was that there are great entrepreneurs everywhere. There's innovation everywhere. There's talent everywhere. But historically, if you're not in a city or an ecosystem that has a density of resources, it is way harder to scale business. And for a long time, really, that was San Francisco and, maybe a handful of other cities in the world. Maybe there's a couple more now. But flip side, if you're in Uruguay or Chile or South Africa or Louisville or Indianapolis, and you can successfully scale business and exit and reinvest that, the impact is exponential, right? Like economies are grown through founder-led businesses that can successfully scale, exit, and reinvest. And so Endeavor, what we do is look for those founders. We're a global network, and so there's a selection process to join Endeavor. And when founders, and we're industry agnostic, right? A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of high growth stuff is tech. Obviously AI, we'll get into stuff like that. But there's awesome stories of non-tech businesses. Rabbit Hole Distillery in Louisville, App Harvest, Jonathan Webb, entrepreneur-led company that scaled and exited, right? Like that was the first. One of the first exits in the Midwest was an indoor farm company, and they absolutely had challenges. It wasn't easy, but to that point, right? Again, entrepreneurs that have a huge vision and that can successfully scale and exit have a big impact on their ecosystems. And so, in the meantime, since 1997, we expanded across the world. Today, we're in 42 countries. In the United States, we're in 8 markets, kind of regional markets. The U.S. is such a massive country, and so regional. We kind of focus regionally rather than countrywide as we do around the rest of the world. And we've selected over 2,500 entrepreneurs into our global network since we started in 1997. And then what we do is we try to create that density, right? If you're not in San Francisco, if you're not in Boston or Austin or a couple other cities, there is still a lack of resources to scale business. And Endeavor tries to bring that. And really what we look at is what do you need access to? You need access to capital, you need access to markets, either globally or other markets across the country. You need access to talent. And who should you often talk to and connect with? Other founders who have been there, who have done it before, who were in your shoes a year ago or 2 years ago. And so that's kind of what Endeavor tries to wrap around founders to help them achieve that scale and successfully achieve it, exit, and reinvest.
So here in our Midwest region, you see a lot of entrepreneurs, companies across the world. What in our region are we needing to improve on desperately that you see other regions maybe doing better, and you can see the impact of what they're doing in those, and we need to bring to ours? So what are those things?
Yep. I'm not going to answer your question yet because I rag on this a little bit. It's in Indy, a little bit Midwest is like, all right, let's talk about the problems. What's wrong? And totally fair question. I'll get to that. But I think we get and you guys like to say in Louisville, kind of same thing. Like, oh, we're not San Francisco, we're not New York, but this, right? When we start from a place of, well, we're not this, we're not doing this well, we're not doing. I think the problems are evident, and I will answer your question. But I like to talk about like what are we doing that's world class? Let's start with that. Like, what do we kick ass at, and what is world class here? Indiana, I can speak to. We did a statewide study 2 years ago with Startup Genome and proved that Indiana is one of the most highly connected ecosystems in the world. And I think that doesn't stop at our state borders, right? Like, sure, that was looking at Indiana, but that's not something that like, oh, you leave Indiana and you head over the road to Louisville. That doesn't end, right? Like the Midwest is just known for being so highly connected in a way that's now proven with data that we're world class at that, right? Guess what? You want to start a startup? You need to rent a building. You need to put up some offices. Like, guess what? You don't have to spend $6,000 a month for a closet office that you might in some other more expensive places in the world. I don't like to frame it as like, yeah, the Midwest is cheap. That connotation is it, but like it is so cost efficient. You could do, yeah, right. Like what does that really mean? Like, all right, it's inexpensive. Well, what can you do with that? You could be a startup founder in the Midwest and you don't have to live on a couch in the basement of some friend you knew from college, right? You could still have
quality of life.
The quality of life is phenomenal. It is so high. And that's for startups, that's for other things. So, there's things like that. We build, in the Midwest, we tend to build companies that are solving real problems in areas that we see in the Midwest, right? Healthcare is huge. A lot of healthcare problems. So what do we have? We have a lot of startups that are tackling that and that are tangibly tackling those problems in a way that, like, when you're disconnected from the problem, when you're building somewhere else in the world that you're abstracted away from the problem you're trying to solve, or you just don't see problems in the same way, you end up starting the next. Yeah. I won't call anybody out, right? But yeah.
On that note, we sat down with Dave Knox on one of our last episodes, and one of those things that our region is particularly good at is supply chain, commerce.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Hubs of transportation. So you saw App Harvest, companies like that taking advantage of that saying of days drive within the numbers like maybe 80% of the U.S.'s population. You've got UPS. Amazon with hubs here, and so you see a lot of really great logistics companies come here, robotics companies. So that's one example of what you're describing there that I've seen.
So tangentially, Heartland Ventures, based out of Columbus, Ohio. They now got folks in Cincinnati, Louisville. Indianapolis. I know they've been down in Louisville. So their model is like, hey, we have access. All of our investors are mid-market companies in construction, in manufacturing, in agriculture. And at first what they were saying was, hey, we're going to go to San Francisco where startups are being built, and we're going to find, a really great ag tech company, and we're going to invest in them, and we're going to connect them to the Midwest where we have customers waiting for them. And what they have ended up doing and discovering is like, wait a minute, those startups are actually being built here in the Midwest, right? Like, the ag tech startups are being built here, the manufacturing tech, the construction tech companies. And there's, we're starting to see this ecosystem of like, well, the startups are actually being built here. So why not let's invest in our startups across the Midwest because they're here and they're solving our problems. And we're going to go ahead and connect them to customers. So like, I love the Heartland Ventures model. They're doing phenomenally. Their fund's doing great. Like, they made a bunch of investments in the Midwest. They may still invest in a company in San Francisco. Awesome. Totally. Right. But they're seeing that kind of ecosystem being built out across the Midwest. It's awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of just like the Midwest being very well connected and one of the strengths being relationship building, a compliment for you. You're a fantastic relationship builder. You're a great connector.
Thank you. Yeah.
Talk about what your role actually consists of, because I'm sure a lot of it is like being a connective tissue for entrepreneurs. So I guess one of my questions, in addition to what does your role consist of, is what is your advice to people looking to build relationships like what you've done? So that's just kind of two questions in one there. But yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, my customer is entrepreneurs, founders. And then my role is to say, to figure out whether they're going to tell me or whether I'm going to figure it out on my own. Like, what challenges are you facing? And again, who can help you solve that with one phone call instead of 5, and in 1 hour instead of 10? And how do we as Endeavor become that connective tissue to break down the barriers around resources and help founders solve their challenges better and faster? And startups are awesome, and founders are conditioned to talk about how they're different and how they're unique and and that's incredibly true around like their value proposition and what they're actually doing. But a lot of the challenges they end up facing are the same. And so we at Endeavor, now we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary of our Midwest office later this year. Right over 10 years, we see the patterns, and we get better and better and saying like, hey, I know what is going to happen in the next 6 months, that if you do well, right, here's the challenges you're going to face. And then we know the founders who have just solved that, or the investors who you really need to talk to, or in Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, in the last couple of years, we've done a lot better job connecting folks across those states. But there's still a lot of work to be done, where if you're a founder here in Indianapolis, like, your next customer is probably a 2-hour drive away in Cincinnati or Louisville, right? There's such, as a region, there's so much space still to connect the right folks and to draw those lines. And so day to day, that's what I spend a lot of time doing. What was the second question? Oh, advice.
I was just
for
I was just asking, like, what's some relationship building advice? You seem to do a great job at maintaining and building relationships.
Do it in person. I'm sorry that I didn't drive down the road to Lexington to do this.
Ironic as
I'm saying this on Zoom. Ironic as this is, do it in person. Like, I Endeavor. Technology is phenomenal, right? Like, being able to do things virtually and connect in different ways is awesome. It's tools in the tool belt, and there's a right tool for the right job. But the speed at which you can build relationships is unmatched to what you can do in person. And because relationships are inherently trust-based, and building trust means seeing somebody in person. And maybe, Aaron Danny does awesome VR work, and he probably knows more than I do about how, virtual reality has incredible potential for human relationship building and trust building, and how it can, how our brains literally can be rewired in that way. Awesome. But for now, do it in person. There's the speed at which you can build trust and build a relationship is just unmatched still, and I think it will be for a long time. The other thing is, one, if you don't ask someone something, you're not going to get an answer. If someone is doing something that you think is incredible and super cool and valuable and impactful, whatever it is, have a conversation, right? Like, that's awesome. And it's fine to tell someone like, hey, I love what you're doing. I think this is cool as hell. Like, can you tell me about it? Most people, founders are busy, and sure, you might get a no. That's okay. But most people like to hear that and are super willing to say, oh yeah, like, of course I'll tell you about what I'm doing. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've got to, when I speak to, like, sometimes I'll go to UK and I'll speak to some classes, or just sometimes I get this question myself. And really, I think people underestimate how willing people that they look up to or their peers will be willing to meet with them if they just say, hey, I want to learn from you. Like, you have something that I admire or want to learn from, or I just want to make a connection in the ecosystem. And, you just got to take your shot. And kind of the flow of that typically is you get a warm intro from somebody, or you go on LinkedIn and you just tell them exactly what I said there. I admire something about you. I want to learn from you. I'm early in my journey, or I'm trying to learn what you know. And people will be surprised how often they'll come back and say, yeah, let's get coffee. And I think that you just have to be, like you said, willing to get some no's and be ignored by some people, but a large percentage of those people are going to get back to you. And then, you can't beat coffees. Like, even if you don't drink coffee, I've never been a coffee drinker, but I do 3 coffees, like almost 3 coffees a week, probably.
Coffee is work, not personal. It's fine.
It's just,
And putting that all together.
All good advice. And
same thing. Like, if there's somebody, if you guys are listening, there's somebody in Louisville that you really want to meet and they're going to give you time, just figure it out. Just drive down the road and go meet them. Right? Like, that's so the amount of effort, and it's a little bit of time, but the amount of effort compared to what you might get out of something in that way is super low.
Well, and take it to, further, I did this in San Francisco. It's like, well, you've got to even branch out as far as San Francisco. If you're going to be a technology founder and you don't at some point go experience San Francisco, you're doing yourself an injustice.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So, when I went out there, hardly knew anybody. I knew one person. That one person multiplied to 20. And then I got a bunch of coffees while I'm out there. And
it's awesome.
A bunch of people said no. A bunch of people ignored me. And that, you just got to, like you said, take the trip. It's
Yep.
it's a social currency that if you're really serious about being a founder, you can't overlook.
Yep. And that kind of
100%.
trust-based relationship building social currency, like it doesn't run out, right? Like if somebody's busy and they tell you no, like that's fine. You can go ahead and find somebody else that's cool and ask them the same thing, right? Like that's totally fine. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I just think that as we talk about like the connectedness of this region, I think it's good to just kind of share thoughts of people who are great at that and encourage others to do the same thing, because that just, it leads to more and more connections. But to focus in on Endeavor Midwest for a little bit, you mentioned there earlier that you guys had just turned 10, just celebrated the 10th anniversary of opening that office. And I was reading through the blog that was talking about that. And I saw mention that, just to kind of put in perspective for the kind of impact that a single regional office is having, Endeavor-led companies generated $345 million in revenue and created nearly 2,000 jobs in this region, which I just think is awesome. So just talk a little bit about the past 10 years, what they've been like at Endeavor Midwest. I know you've been there for 5 of them now, but it's been a very significant 5 years.
Yep. I mean, so year one, those numbers were zero, right? Like started at zero. No,
exactly.
There were entrepreneurs, but Endeavor, we weren't working companies, we're new. You fast forward 10 years and annually we're working, across our kind of so we have 3 tiers of servicing, and really it's our scale up program is local, kind of our regional program. And we've got 8 US offices now. And so entrepreneurs that go to, so we just hosted a national selection panel in Louisville in April. Harry Wilson from Limitless Minds pitched that in the past. So we've got this layer of a national network and offering, and then there's an international component. And so that's kind of how we tier out entrepreneurs, and as they scale, they kind of continue along those. And so those numbers today, you have $345 million in revenue. That is just the entrepreneurs that have gone through our entire process to the international level and become Endeavor entrepreneurs. At that national, regional level, right, where there's over 50 businesses total working with today. So that number is a lot bigger. And those are big numbers, right? Like, again, entrepreneurs that scale are who push economies forward, right? Like the growth that you can have as an entrepreneur business is phenomenal. And those are 2,000 jobs that are high quality, that tend to have very high career prospects in the future, right? They end up being very good for developing skills. As at earlier stage companies, you develop more skills, you tend to have more responsibilities on average. Those are better for people in their careers. The companies that do become very successful, and that have scaled, one, they tend to make people money, and those people tend to go and invest that money, which is cool. But those are the companies that spin off other entrepreneurs, right? That's where, Evan, your entrepreneur journey started at an entrepreneur-led company. And it's cool to work for that, but you get people with like, oh, I've got ideas, and oh, I see how this works. And oh, I see that if I have an idea to fix something, I can actually go and start something and try that myself, right? Like that impact, the mindset impact that entrepreneur-led companies have is just incredible. Just kind of getting back to your question, over 10 years, I think when we launched in 2015 to 16, started based in Louisville. Now we're kind of Louisville, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, which was always a regional office. The first entrepreneur that we selected into our global network was from Indiana, from Southern Indiana. So there's always a regionality to it. But we've over 10 years kind of grown and started to, again, connect more and more across the 3 states, but then the cities that we're in, Louisville, Lexington, spent a lot of time in Indianapolis, Cincinnati, right? There is so much happening. There's so much activity still. And the last 3 to 4 years, obviously with COVID and with interest rates and it's been a really tough time for startups. But guess what? There's incredible entrepreneurs today building companies, new companies that have come out of all that, companies that, guess what? Were really set up to be resilient or pivoted really well and have continued to do really well. I semi-regularly post on LinkedIn kind of with entrepreneur updates, and it doesn't take me long to just go across the network and see like, holy cow, like that's awesome. They just did that. And that's a huge, just to create and curate a list, like it hasn't stopped, right? Those updates haven't stopped, and entrepreneurs continue to do what they do, which is innovate, solve problems, challenge the status quo, and improve things.
How do companies become a part of the network? And, maybe what's the latest company to join?
Yep. So Let's see. So we talked 3 years ago. So in 2022, Julia Reagan from RX Lightning passed our international selection panel, and it's competitive. So we flew to Greece. We do these international panels all over the world, and Julia Reagan uh, pitched alongside 14 or 15 other founders from about 14 or 15 other countries, right? So we're sending at that point, we're sending the best companies that we work with in the region, and they're going up with the best companies that all other Endeavor offices and teams around the world are looking for and finding. And we don't compare companies directly, but like that's the level of competition that a company like RX Lightning was going up against. So it is competitive, it is difficult. Julia passed in 2022, ended up raising an oversubscribed Series A round, $7.5 million in a really tough environment. Like awesome. Again, solving a real problem in specialty medications, improving people's lives. And Julia is doing something, she's solving a problem that she lived and experienced for 15 years. So they were selected in the global network in 2022. So kind of looking at that national level, I mentioned Limitless Minds. Harry Wilson is in Louisville building an awesome company, helping democratize access to top tier performance and mindset coaches, and democratizing that to the corporate athlete, right? So there's an awesome story there. Harry's little brother is Russell Wilson, pretty good football player who gets incredible performance mindset, sports psychology coaching at the top tier as an athlete. And Harry said, well, hang on, like I'm in sales, in pharma sales. It's incredibly competitive. We're at the top tier. We're the corporate athletes. Like how do we transition that kind of access to a corporate setting? And that's what they're doing. And they're crushing it. It's amazing. So Limitless Minds, as well as 820 Solar, talk about another, Midwest, heartland, mid country problem, energy prices. And we've got a lot of sun, right, in the Midwest. And so Kent and Tony, the founders of that, had a background in fintech and in payments, and are taking that into the solar industry, where they're a vertically integrated solar installer, but with an incredible financial vehicle for high net worth individuals to donate solar to nonprofits. And nonprofits historically, schools, universities, churches, food banks, like don't have the capital to expend on putting solar on roofs. But it's a great thing to do for a long-term standpoint, cost savings, energy, all that kind of stuff. So they've just got this incredible model. It's called Brightwell Capital. That, guess what? Entrepreneurs using their experience, taking their backgrounds, being entrepreneurial, seeing a challenge and applying that in a different way, and doing something that's incredibly important and impactful. And their company's growing phenomenally. It's amazing. So 820 Solar, Limitless Minds, both in the last year, have passed our national selection panel, kind of working at the U.S. level. Here in Indianapolis, True Essence Food, Matt Rubin, spent time in commercialization and technology for a long time, and ended up making chocolate, and that taking what he did with that into this food technology that's preserving flavor and freshness for foods in a mechanical process, so non-additive, in a way that is absolutely mind-blowing. And I think something like 2/3 of foods in the grocery store shelves are I'm going to blank on the word. It's incredibly broadly applicable to a lot of stuff. And the technology is phenomenal. So if you're ever in Indianapolis, go to True Essence Foods, get a tour. Your mind will be blown. Their technology is incredible and has a global impact. Has a global opportunity with that.
I love that. And let's talk also about, there's a big exit in the ecosystem too. Referring to SKU Vault, who we've had on the podcast, which it'd be awesome to have him back on soon and kind of talk about everything that's happened post-exit. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that exit and what you've seen kind of unfold in the ecosystem since that exit's happened. That's a big key to growing a startup ecosystem, is being able to have some liquidity events like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. That is, for a healthy ecosystem, you have to have those companies that scale, exit, and that reinvest. And so Andy and Slava, co-founders of SKU Vault, selected as Endeavor Entrepreneurs 2018 or so. They ended up raising a Series A round. Poplar Ventures from Louisville was involved, which, again, love that. Local capital means when the company does well and exits, a lot of that money stays locally. And that's huge. Endeavor's fund, Catalyst, is a rules-based fund. We invest globally in Endeavor Entrepreneurs. We invest in that round, which is awesome as well. And so they were acquired, or did M&A with Linworks, a UK-based company. And a lot of that was because Andy and Slava built an awesome company that was incredibly defensible, that had great growth. Like just they built a super strong technology company. And you do that, the markets change, interest rates change, capital raising environments change. High quality companies still do well, which is awesome. And so Andy ended up joining Endeavor's board in the Midwest. We have 4 founders who we have supported who are Endeavor entrepreneurs. We supported through their growth who have now joined our board, which is not at all required, but something that we're like, if you want to give back and reinvest and mentor the next generation of high growth entrepreneurs, join the board. And that's exactly what you're going to do. And so we appreciate Andy as well as Kaveh from Rabbit Hole, Ankur Gopal from Interapt, you all know, and then Stacy Griggs from El Toro, also in Louisville, who have all committed to joining the board, which means, really what does that mean? It means I call them up and I say, hey, I've got a founder who would love to connect with you, and here's their challenge, and here's what they need help with, and I know that you know how to help with that. And they say yes, which is fantastic. And we, that's the kind of thing that we need. I joke a little bit when I talk about Endeavor, and I'm like, if you are the kind of founder who scales, Evan, when your company grows and scales and crushes it and you make a bucket of money, don't go sail the Mediterranean. And if you do, I'm not going to blame you. Like, you probably deserve that. But we're looking for the founders who are like, you know what? Like, I'm committed to giving back and helping the next one and paying it forward. And so that's what Endeavor, from an entrepreneur standpoint, from a person standpoint, that's what we're looking for. And those founders, as well as others, Julia Reagan just served as a panelist for our national selection panel. And that's a lot of time. That's a full day. She is still growing and scaling a impactful high growth company. So she's got her hands full, but gave, an entire day to assess and judge other companies that were pitching, again, 2 years behind her, 18 months behind her, which again is sometimes the most valuable thing for a founder.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that this region just desperately needs. And to your point, like Andy and Slav, they appear to be doing a great job of that, which is, have that exit, pour energy and learnings and capital back into the ecosystem. And that's just what we desperately need. In my opinion, groups like Endeavor, Awesome Inc., KY Innovation, name your accelerator, name your entrepreneurial network. Those things are great for the day-to-day entrepreneurial battles of having a network, having someone to lean on, having advice, having events. But the real thing that scales very quickly in ecosystem, and this very well in Indianapolis, is those large exits that get poured back into the ecosystem, like Exact Target. That 100%. I just always love to go back to that example, because we can do all we want from an event perspective, from a networking perspective, from a support perspective, but it's inches compared to, miles when you have an exit event. Like, we need 100%. More of those desperately. We need founders that are willing to build at that scale and want to build at that scale. That's one thing I'm trying to get out there more from Middle Tech's platform we have here in our audience is, if you want to be a founder and you have the capacity to go big or the willingness to go big, go as hard as you can, because that is what's going to move Kentucky the most, is the big exits. And you got to have the mindset of, I'm starting this company and I want it to be a very big company. If you're going to go the venture route, you just don't have a choice. That's how you have to think. And I think we just need more of that and more velocity of exits and capital going back in. And I think until that happens, again, we're moving inch by inch by inch and improvements in our ecosystem. And we just have to have more leaps. And those exit events are miles at a time, not inches.
I think we absolutely need big exits and loud failures. Those two things are the most impactful, right? Absolutely big exit. And, caveat with big exits, top line numbers awesome, right? Like $1 billion, but it matters where that capital goes, right? Exact Target was so successful because a ton of employees had great equity and were set up for success for that exit to happen, that you had a ton of young folks, driven folks who now had money and experience, and they went out and did it again. So big exits and then loud failures. There is nothing, it's worse for a company when, it's worse for a startup when they shut down quietly and nobody knows, right? Failures need to be loud. Failures, the connotation of failure, right? Like, what happens with a loud failure is that, everybody says, okay, here's what happens. And so let's avoid that, right? And the employees can say, I know what went wrong there, and I've got an idea, and I know I'm not going to make that mistake, right? Like that is incredibly valuable too, for employees, for founders, and for other people to know, like, why did it go wrong? Like maybe it was because the cap table was really messed up and they ran out of money, and awesome. Let's make sure that everybody knows a lot of that stuff so that it can be avoided in the future. Right. And that's something I think that we can improve on still is, what is the failure rate of startups? 99%, call it that, right? Like there's 99 lessons to be learned, at least for every one company that successfully exits. And so like, let's look at those 99 companies as lessons learned and talk about them and share that and make sure that across the Midwest that we're not doing that again and that we can improve on that kind of stuff as well. And then when we have that one exit, it's miles forward and people can go out and do it again, right? Those two things are symbiotic. The events matter, the connectors matter, the ecosystem. I think that sometimes like the word ecosystem, we kind of gloss over a little bit, but like thinking about what that is, what is an ecosystem in nature, right? It's a whole bunch of millions of little components all working together and all impacting each other. Like for a successful ecosystem to work, you often need all of those components and you need all of those things. And so that, all the other wraparound stuff is important too. I don't want to downplay that, but you're right. Big exits, loud failures. Let's do it.
Yeah, I love the loud failure part. When Simba, we had I like to just say an unsuccessful exit. We exited to return capital to investors. So in my opinion,
you learned some lessons.
Things to celebrate there, but
yeah, oh, absolutely.
Overall, those are failures that massive amount of learnings came from, and I decided to write about. Yep. And after I wrote about it and was loud about it, I noticed just how many other people came out of the woodwork and said, hey, like, I struggle with these things too. Hey, appreciate you sharing these. I know I'm not alone, or I want to avoid this myself, or now I want to try to start it because I see that you went through it, you're still alive and you're actually doing it again. So it's just I haven't heard somebody say it like that, which is a loud failure. I think that is important because as a founder, it's like embarrassing in a lot of ways. You lost people's money or you lost your own money, you put your family at risk of starting a business, your own personal well-being. And then when it fails, you don't want to talk about it. But I think just for the sake of everybody else, and like if you want to invest in your community, you want to improve your community, just the mindset that it takes to be an entrepreneur is that failure is part of it. And so you just need to be open about it because hiding it's not going to help you and it's not going to help the community. So it's like, what are you doing here? I get that you have pride, absolutely. But at the same time, just get over it.
Yep. And it's like, I don't want to downplay, right? Like companies that end up going under and not working, like it's really tough. Like it's not easy. And sometimes there are personal and family dynamics and pride like that. That is incredibly important stuff. And I don't want to downplay that. But again, you just glossed over it. I don't know you've shared this before, but like, hey, your company didn't work, but you also returned some investors' money. You learned a bunch of lessons. Like in some ways, like there was an incredible success there. Like, oh, all right, you're part of the 99%. Guess what? So is almost everybody else, in the startup world. And just talking about kind of the, what's come from that now, you're starting another company, you've inspired, mentored, helped, I don't know how many other founders, 50, probably, at least, just by sharing that. And you're not a super loud person, I would say. And the impact you've been able to have just by sharing that and being open to talk with people is phenomenal. That's incredible.
Yeah, agreed on all that for sure. To kind of pivot the conversation here real quick, I wanted to hear you tell a story, Jake. I saw this post on LinkedIn and I was like, this is the most Jake Budler thing I've ever seen. And I'm referring to a story of you being over. Yeah, you can. It's the one when you're over in Ireland and you're I guess talking to the Ireland office of Endeavor, and you managed to make a connection between Rabbit Hole and a brewer over in Ireland. So just kind of talk about how that came to be and what came of that, because I think it's just, it's awesome is what it is, but it's very you is also what it is.
I mean, some things are just obvious, right? Like we've got a bourbon company in Louisville. That's awesome. We're a really cool craft beer distillery in Ireland. Like they should probably talk. And sometimes with Endeavor, I mean, this is a case of that. And I'll tell the story a little bit of just like, sometimes it's like, hey, I don't really know what's going to happen here, but I know if you guys talk, something great's going to happen. And I think that was one of those, like, what is going to happen? I have no idea. Maybe nothing. That's right. But I suspect that a conversation will lead to something really cool, and this is one of those. So, I mentioned Endeavor. We're in 42 countries now. Just one of the awesome parts of my job is that we kind of have the opportunity to do immersions and go work with other offices, and it's a really cool experience. I went to Dublin for a month and worked with the team there. Obviously that's a really awesome benefit, but it also benefits our network. And this is we're relationship building, and how I already talked about this. Like, best way to build relationships is do it in person, and so. Being able to travel around the world is awesome, but it actually adds to Endeavor and what we can do because the things just pop up like this. So Rory, as our managing director in Ireland, actually joined Endeavor through a connection through a brewery called Wicklow Wolf that one of our board members had invested in. Great story there. That's even how Rory got connected to Endeavor. But I was in Ireland, and Rory and I were like, well, we got it. We have to go to Wicklow Wolf. Quincy's great. Like, let's go. We got a product test to make sure that they're keeping up to scratch. Headed out to Wicklow, and then it didn't take long to say, well, hang on, like, Cave's got some bourbon barrels, and it makes some really awesome products. So what could come of a connection here? Anyone's guess, but probably something awesome. So that's now. So 2 or 3 months ago, they announced the Rabbit Hole Wicklow collaboration beer. Awesome, super excited. I don't think you can get it in the States yet. I will find a way to get to Ireland sometime soon, specifically to try a beer, which the ROI on that beer, we'll see. But so the Wicklow Wolf did a beer aged in, and they did a style. They actually made a style. I think it was a Kentucky Common, which is contrary to the name and not a common style beer anymore, but brewed a Kentucky Common, aged it in Rabbit Hole barrels, and whatever, about 18 months later, put that stuff in cans, and it's going to be phenomenal. So, again, I back to kind of Endeavor, and the better we do after 10 years, and the more we know people, and the more we see it, the more we see the patterns, the better we can be at identifying, like, hey, this person and this person, or this company, that company, they need to connect. And, we'll get better and better at value coming out of that. And sometimes it's awesome beer.
I love that. You need to put on your LinkedIn, facilitator of international business. That's what you're doing.
Just a Tuesday.
Just a Tuesday. No, I thought that was awesome. I thought that was a great testament to like what Endeavor is trying to do, building that kind of global network, and then finding ways for people all the way on different sides of the planet to collaborate with each other. So I thought it was really cool that you found a way for a Kentucky company to collaborate with an Irish company. To wrap things up here. What a small world. I know. But to wrap things up here and kind of bring it back to the Midwest ecosystem, we talked about earlier in the conversation, what do you see entrepreneurs struggling with the most in this region? And we kind of talked about that part of it, but let's move to talking about what you're excited about. So, what gets you excited about when you think about the next 10 years for Endeavor Midwest?
Oh man, that is a phenomenal question, because it's kind of a layup, but actually, there's a lot to think about. I think if we look at, Endeavor, but just think about the last 10 years of entrepreneurship in the Midwest, and Endeavor is a part of that, but even more broadly, like, there was interest rates and bank collapses and all this, but like the trend line is positive, and the trend line, I think, is pretty significantly positive. And so, just extrapolating that and thinking, well, what about the next 10 years? Like, absolutely, it's like this, there's challenges, but like there is so much activity. We've been saying for years, and it almost sounds kind of like, rote at this point and repeated, but like there has never been less technology in the Midwest. There have never been fewer founders in the Midwest. There's never been, less, there's probably been more opportunity. It's like, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. Thinking back, like, what do you quantify opportunity as? But like the opportunities are massive. And to me, the trend line of entrepreneurship and founders and opportunity in the Midwest is incredibly positive. And so like, what does that look like in a decade from now? I wish I do, because I'd probably make some good investments today. But to me, it's the continuation of, more exits, more founders, more entrepreneurs coming out of that, more problems being solved, more industries being pushed forward by people who say, you know what, I think I could do that better, and let me build a product or a service or a solution to that, and it eventually working. And more loud failures leads to more big exits. I think that's going to be the next 10 years in entrepreneurship in general, in technology. I talk about the cities a little bit. Like, I'm here in Indianapolis. I'd put money on this. Like, there's never been more money in development in the city of Indianapolis than ever before. I mean, there's just significant projects in development. Cincy, Louisville as well. There's just in the cities, in the quality of life, in across the state, right? There's just so much potential, and I think we're starting to realize that, and we're starting to tap into that in a lot of different ways, which is great. Again, goes back to what's world class today. I think we're going to continue on. Louisville is a world class hospitality city, hands down. Like, spending a weekend in Louisville, right? Like, you can have an incredible time. The hospitality is so high tier. There's so many small independent businesses that are, you could put anywhere else in the world and they'd thrive. They'd crush it. Like, the quality in that sense is so high. And so I think we're becoming a little bit louder, and I think we could do better about like what is good here and what is world class and what are strength. And let's focus on those things and start to leverage those again, rather than like, well, we're not this, and we don't have mountains and oceans. And, anytime somebody says that, I say, oh shit, like, that sounds great. Like, now I'm thinking about going to surf, in the ocean, and like, oh, what a bummer. Like, let's flip the conversation and continue to promote, like, what are we amazing at? What do we kick ass at? And, then we've got this awesome cohort of entrepreneurs. We're going to have more going out and solving the challenges and fixing the problems that we have.
Agreed. And I really do feel like we're primed to see a pretty sizable exit soon, I would imagine, based on some of the companies we talked about on this episode. I would imagine that within the next 10 years, we'll see one of those entrepreneurs have one of those big exits. I'd love to see it be in the billions. We'll take what we can get at this point in terms of liquidation events. But, we've got some incredible entrepreneurs that are doing incredible things here. And I agree with you. I think the opportunities they're only going to increase from here. We've got a lot of the right things moving in the right direction. So, Jake, 100%. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on here and talk to us, man. Before we let you go, where can listeners find you if they want to connect with you?
LinkedIn, great place to start. Jake Budler. Head over to Endeavor Midwest on LinkedIn as well. That's our regional page. Drop us a message there. Drop me a message on LinkedIn, and we'll chat.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much, dude. It was great catching up.
Always good to chat with you guys. Appreciate you having me.